Nav is our tips and tricks blog for Microsoft Dynamics NAV and for Dynamics 365 for financials. I'll actually lead with that. If you've never been there, we keep a lot of useful information there. This is going to come up on your screen in a moment. You can read this. It's very friendly on tablets, phones, as well as your computer. And as you will see over here, we've got a lot of different categories such as tips and tricks, video blogs. We do record sessions like these and put them up on our site as well. We have issues and solutions, did you know, as well as a glossary of terms and frequently asked questions. So if you're looking to get some information about, what is a cumulative update, what's a posting group, etc., and we'll keep building this out, you'll find a lot of different information. You'll find frequently asked questions about Dynamics NAV. I know one of the things that our clients and our prospects are usually very curious about are hotfixes and updates. So if you want to know where you can find the latest cumulative updates for NAV, you can just come to this page and click the link. It'll take you to the Microsoft page where you can download them. And then across different versions and by categories as well and use, you'll find a lot of information. So we do hope you'll visit and bookmark our site. We routinely present and put on new content, and our clients usually tell us that it's very good and helpful information. So with that, I think at this point, when I pull up my PowerPoint, everybody should be able to see this. Let's try this now. You should be seeing, are your tasks automated yet? Are your tasks automated yet? Let's learn NAV webinar.
Got it.
So about myself, a little bit, I am the Dynamics NAV product manager here at InterDyn BMI, and I've been working with Dynamics NAV since 2007, so it's been about 10 years now. By background, I am a certified implementer and developer. You'll see my email address below here. It's also going to be on the very last slide for our Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can email me. You can also email marketing@InterDyn BMI or support@InterDyn BMI, which tend to be a lot easier than my name. So if you don't remember this, you're welcome to go down that way. I am located in Houston, Texas, but like a lot of my fellow consultants, we help customers all across the country, coast to coast. So wherever you are, I will still serve as product manager for you and be happy to assist you in any technical issues or concerns that you have, any interest in new technology that you may have as well. So with that, let's continue on to the next slide. Our focus today is going to be around the jobs functionality in Dynamics NAV, or the job queue, excuse me, functionality in Dynamics NAV. I like to usually start with some session objectives. This is not the agenda. I do have the agenda on the following slide, but for anybody attending, I want to make sure that I'm at least laying out what it is I'll be covering so you have an idea. I'll be talking about the job queue functionality. I'll be talking about in general how we control automation tasks in Dynamics NAV and how we can save some time. So I think if you saw the abstract or the excerpt for the invitation today, that's really what it was in a nutshell. The way we break it down in our agenda is by first kind of giving you a little bit of information on what it takes. Is this complicated, right? I mean, what type of knowledge do I need to have? What type of skill level do I need to have in Dynamics NAV? Where can I use task automation in NAV? That's usually an important question. What can you automate? What are the things that are possibly going to be doable with this type of functionality? I'll introduce you to an area called the report inbox, which may or may not be available in your version. I'll explain to you the job queues, job queue categories and entries. Then we'll kind of go in a little bit further. When you automate tasks in Dynamics NAV, you have the ability to automate things just for yourself or within your own session, or there's also an area in Dynamics NAV where you can automate at a server level. So multiple people can piggyback off of the NAV server. And then finally, as with anything that we automate, we want to make sure we have some control over the situation. Is it working? Was the last automation run successful? Did it fail? What happened? So I'll show you how you can kind of manage the error tracking or the logging, as it were, in Dynamics NAV. So we've got a few folks. I'm going to open up a couple of polls. You're welcome to take a quick second to just review this and answer. I am curious about what versions of Dynamics NAV most of us are on today. So on your screen now, you should be seeing the poll. I have 2015, 2016, and 2017 in one row because for the context of this conversation, for the purpose of this conversation, that the functionality within these three versions is very much identical. As we get to older versions, there are some things available in one that are not available in the other, so I do want to kind of break them down further. So I'll leave this up for just another 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, everybody's voted, and I'm going to bring up the poll results. What's neat is that everybody here on this call is a NAV 2015 to 2017, and that's actually very encouraging because as I show you functionality today, it will apply to the version of NAV that you're on. And what I do want to do too is, as I go through my introduction slide, I'm going to be talking about a few things, so maybe it does help me to understand what level of Dynamics NAV experience you have. And so let's hide this, and I'm going to open up one more poll right now, and then we have another one that will come up a little bit later. So I'm curious to know your skill level with Dynamics NAV. Are you, are you fairly new to the product? Usually when I'm talking to folks who are in 2016, 2017, you may have been using it for a short amount of time. I see there's somebody with a sense of humor. And, well, right, 100% of people have voted, and it's all, everybody's got a sense of humor. I should have known better. Let me close this, and everybody's voted for what is this NAV thing you speak of? Well, the good news is even if you are a beginner, most of the things that I will show you today, the takeaways from today's session, they're going to apply to you. Now, there may be things that you won't quickly understand. And when I'm referring to an automation of a report, I may talk about a report ID, and you may not know much about it or how to get around to seeing a report ID. So what I'll do is I'll touch on a little bit of that as well. Let's go ahead a little bit, and if we could talk about where we want to go with Dynamics NAV's automation functionality. First of all, it's not complicated. If you were in 2009 or older, it used to be a more difficult task. You needed to have the admin involved. There was a lot of back-end functionality that needed to be configured up front. Today, in Dynamics NAV 2013 R2 onwards, it's been fairly simplified. Most of the things that we need are going to be right within our NAV client. So I put in 3 frequently asked questions that I get about when I talk about automation. How do I do it? Well, you do it using functionality called job queue. So you will not find a word in Dynamics NAV if you're searching automate is not necessarily a search word that will yield any results. But if you look for a job queue, which is not to be confused with the jobs module in Dynamics NAV, which is for project accounting, if you look for job queue, you'll find exactly what you need to do. Do you need access to the NAV development environment, or do you need to know how to write code? Well, for most of what I'll be covering today, or pretty much for everything I'll be covering today, you do not need to write a single line of code. You may need to have access to the NAV server if you want to have your automation run off of the server. For folks who do not have access to the server, either because your admin won't allow for it or for other security reasons, there are alternatives where you can just set up automation within your own session, and it will keep running for as long as your session goes, or for as long as your computer stays on. So those are options as well. There are times when you may want to have some very condition-based or complex automation tasks, and you may need to write some code. But you will find that most of the rank and file type of reports that we run should be just fine without ever having to go to the dev environment. And then lastly, do I need my IT team or my partner, my VAR, to do this for me? And the answer is no. It's mostly do-it-yourself type of tasks. There will be instances if it's really complex, you might need our help or you might need your IT team's help, but I'll show you some really good examples of how you can self-manage a lot of the things that we're looking to do. So where can I use automation? Reports and code units. Those are the 2 most important places. Not all of the reports can be automated out of the box, so this is an important distinction. One of the things I always like to remind people about is if you are working with inventory and you use either the requisition worksheet or the planning worksheet to manage inventory levels and purchasing, manufacturing, transfer order or assembly recommendations, I frequently hear from people that they would like to automate that. I want my MRP, my planning worksheet that is, or my requisition worksheet to run every 2 days, every 30 minutes, depending on whatever type of volume you have of transactions and requirements. Well, the long answer is it can be automated, but that is a good example of a report that cannot be automated right out of the box. It is one of those places where either your partner or if you have a developer license, somebody on your team who's a developer will need to write a few lines of code to allow that task to be automated. But a lot of reports like HDR reports, customer statements, even financial reports can be automated. And when you automate things, there are opportunities for you to set recurring automations, which we'll talk about, and also reports that can be scheduled as one-time automations. So you're about to run an inventory valuation report. You look at it and go, perfect, well, I know this report or my inventory valuation report is probably going to take me 15 minutes or 30 minutes or even 5, and I just don't have the time to sit around and wait for it right now. Why don't I have it run so that it's there and ready for me to use when I come back from lunch? So you could schedule those types of reports. So let's take a quick peek to see what type of reports can actually be scheduled, or how do you know if a report can be scheduled. I will show you more around recurring tasks as I progress through the session. But let me bring up my Dynamics NAV session here and drag my remote desktop window. So here I am logged into a Dynamics NAV, excuse me, Dynamics NAV 2017 environment. And on my home screen here, I see a few reports that are right in my ribbon. Now, of course, if you have worked with Dynamics NAV, you know that you have reports that are usually contextually related to your role right up here, and then other reports can be found in other functional areas. So if I'm looking at a list of customers or vendors or items, there's always that navigation menu or the ribbon breakdown of home, action, navigate, and report, with the reports carrying the full list of relevant reports. I wouldn't say full list, but usually the key list of reports contextually related to the menu I'm on. And from a larger scheme of things, if I'm looking to see the entire sitemap for Dynamics NAV and then find certain reports, I can go to Departments, which will show me my full sitemap. You may in your environment have more menus that are self-created or related to an ISV product or something that we've done for you. And then from within that, if you're looking for a certain report, you could always say Sales and Marketing Reports by going to Sales and Marketing, then clicking on Reports and Analysis. Now, as I look at any of these reports, if I want to see if I can schedule something, let's maybe pick my customer top 10 list. I click on it and this pops up. This is officially or formally called a request page. So this is where you can key in your options and then set your filters. It will also tell you what you're setting a filter on. In some reports you might find multiple filter panes. One could be for items, another one could be for something related to items like locations, etc. But here I see I can set filters for things on the customer table, and I can set filters on various fields, some of which are predefined, and I can add more over here. Now, to our point on scheduling, look down here. In the newer versions of NAV, 2015 and newer, Microsoft introduced this little down pointing arrow thingy. So instead of clicking on print, if you just click right over here, it will show you some options. So instead of sending to your printer, it can send to PDF, it can send to Word, Excel, or more importantly, it'll give you your schedule option. So here I can come in and say schedule, and I could then select how I want this report to be printed out. Word, Excel, print, or none, if it's processing only. For those of you who don't know what a processing report is, a processing report is essentially a script in Dynamics NAV. For an example, maybe you want to have all customers automatically updated with a dimension code, or you just introduced a new territory code and you want all customers to have a territory code. So you can basically write a script that says just go ahead and update all records, or all records matching this filter criteria, and then update them with this value. Really helpful. It runs in the background, it does an update, and certain times you might have periodic updates that you need to take place. So I'm going to have this sent to PDF, and then I could say earliest start date time, and I would set my date and my time here. And if I needed to have an expiration time, if this is not a recurring thing, then I would usually mark an expiration date and time as well. And I hit OK, and it would schedule that and it would send it as a PDF to my home screen, which I'll talk about what a report inbox is in just a little bit. And also, if you send it to a printer, then it would just send to your favorite printer. It will give you the option of selecting which of your printers this is going to go to from the drop-down. Now, I'm in an RDP environment here, so I don't have a printer. You could certainly send it to a shared printer. One little tip I will point out is if you are in remote environments, if you're in an RDP type of environment and you have a shared printer that's at your desk, consider not sending large reports to that printer, because what I've found is large reports can take even longer when you're trying to print out to a shared printer. In more instances than not, I find it's quicker if we just have a PDF printer enabled and we print it to PDF on this machine, download the PDF and then print it. It's just a little suggestion. If you do struggle with large reports printing remotely, that might be a solution to your problem. All right, let's hit cancel. Go back to our PowerPoint. So that's how we schedule things, and that's how we know which reports can be scheduled. If a report does not have scheduling capability, it's actually not going to give you that option at all. So the report inbox. Now the report inbox in Dynamics NAV is available in NAV 2015 and newer, which basically applies to everybody here on our session. So that's a good thing. On your home screen, it'll be there, say front and center, or maybe front and right, or front and left, wherever you have the panel. But that report inbox is going to be your most important place for tracking things that you routinely require. You can schedule those reports that you wanted, or those code units that you needed executed. More often than not here, we're only talking about reports. And if you have those being printed to Word, Excel, or PDF, the result will actually show up right there, and you can double click it and you'd be able to view the report. Then you can delete it after it's been run, and then it can rerun again. More often than not, you are looking at recurring things. So if you've got a report like a top 10 customer report, it will run every day at your predefined time, and it will just deliver it right there. So you come in the morning, that becomes one of the first things you check. It's very simple to manage. It's very user-friendly, and it works both in the Windows client as well as the web client. Now, because I wanted to make sure the development environment was available to me for some advanced stuff that we'll be talking about later today, I actually kept my remote desktop as my way of accessing Dynamics NAV. You could very well have the NAV client installed on your machine directly, so it should work just fine whether you're an RDP or a locally installed client. You do not have to be on the server to be doing some of the things I'm doing. Let's go to my home screen. So when I go to my home screen, Role Center, this is basically what I first see when I log in. Now, that's assuming that I'm logged in as a president. You may have a very different layout. You may actually see those blue tiles on your home screen, and you might be somebody like an order processor or someone else. So no matter how you access NAV, you could have a report inbox area showing. If you don't and you're using the Windows client, go to the main menu or the application menu button, and then you can customize this page. So customize this page, and make sure that report inbox is added to one of these areas. You can move them left, down, above, to the left pane, to the right pane. You have the ability to break it down into 2 columns here. So you could easily make sure, just add the report inbox to wherever it is that you need. Once you have it here, I've actually got some report inbox or reports pre-configured. So these are customer top 10 lists and HDR reports, vendor trial balance reports, and you'll see in some cases I have multiple instances of the same report. And if you look closely, you will see that it actually ran once on the 13th, the top 10 list report, and then it ran again on the 16th. Well, why did it not run on the 14th and the 15th, and why is it running in this recurring fashion? Well, this is all very easy to manage, and I'll show you this in a second. Let's actually pull up one of these reports. So as I just double click it, if I have a PDF viewer, it'll prompt me to open, or I can save this to my desktop if I actually want to keep this copy elsewhere. Once I've viewed the report, if I'd actually like to go and remove this report, I can go ahead and just delete this by clicking and saying delete. Now, if I had opened this report, what it would have done is then stop showing this in bold. It would become just kind of, it would be a lighter font or a regular font. Let's go to this customer top 10 list report and actually, well, why don't I go this way? Why don't I say show queue? So this will actually show me all the things that have been scheduled with my user ID. Things that will show up in the inbox are the reports. There are other things like code units, which are basically tasks that I'm automating in Dynamics NAV that don't necessarily produce an output, not a visual output at least. So when I'm looking at it, I might say, all right, well, these are things like my item sales forecast. I use some OCR functionality that's new to NAV 2016 and 2017, and so on, which are not relevant to the conversation today, but these are running. You'll find things that are running and not by just looking at this. Is it scheduled? Yes, no. You will see certain things like on hold and ready as well. I usually focus more on this instead of the schedule. So the ready ones are the ones that are actually running periodically. You'll see there's an earliest start date and time. It'll tell you if this is a recurring job. There are certain tasks that happen only once a day, and these have a number of minutes between runs set to 0. So this is where we know that this does not need to happen over and over again. When we have more tasks, when we have a task that happens multiple times a day, like the synchronization management or approval request deletions, I can set a certain number of minutes that it needs to recur at. My OCR sent to service happens every 5 minutes. These happen every 1,440 minutes, and so on and so forth. Now let's actually pick that customer top 10 list report, and let's edit this. And after that, I'll actually create another report as well that we're going to just schedule, so you get a sense for how easy it is for you to create it. Here we're tracking things like the object ID to run or the object type to run. I'll explain how you can have a new report when we create one from scratch. So not how to create a new report as much as how to select a new report to automate. The description automatically populates. It will show me the earliest date and time that this was set to run at. The status is of course marked ready, and I have some more fields that are hidden. I'll expand that. If I have parameter strings or a job queue category code, which I have not introduced you to yet, which I will be talking about a little bit, you can actually have this run off of a certain category. I can set my filter options. So if there are page options that I want to predefine, I've marked this as checked, and then I select report request page. Here I can define certain things that I'd like to have the report always run with. So is this going to show me sales dollar or balance dollar? These are report options. Top 10 quantity. Is this going to be a pie chart, or is there a certain bar chart, another type of presentation I'm interested in? These are all the things that you would have seen if you were running the report manually as well. Other filters you may be interested in, only certain customers with a certain posting group or a certain salesperson code, etc. You can select those filters as well. And dates. And I'll talk about some dates when I'm running a custom report, when I'll be adding a new one in just a little bit. Now, just like we saw with the scheduling option, PDF, Word, Excel, print, or script. And one of the most requested features is, can I not email this? The short answer is not out of the box. This would require some assistance from our side. Dynamics NAV actually does have built-in emailing capabilities, especially in versions 2016 and newer. You'll find that it's quite prevalent. It's on most screens, including sales invoices and purchase documents, etc. Right on your transaction screen, you will see either post an email, or you will see an email or send function, which will look at the customer, the vendor defaults, and determine if it's being emailed or printed, etc. So we would piggyback off of the same type of functionality, and we can make emailing one more option here for you. But out of the box in standard NAV, that's not an option available. Recurrence. Here's where we select how many times and how often it will run. So it runs, this particular top 10 report runs on Mondays through Fridays. So if you recall back on my home screen, I had the top 10 report run on 13th and then again on 16th. So it was taking a well-deserved break on the 14th and the 15th, which were Saturday and Sunday. And I have it set to run at 2:48 p.m. every time. So that's when it runs, and that's when it delivers to my home screen. Now, one of the things too that you want to keep in mind is Dynamics NAV server can consider time in different time zones. So when you're setting up your NAV service tier, you can tell your administrator, or your administrator rather, can configure it so that the Dynamics NAV instances run as universal time or central standard time or eastern time, etc., wherever it is that you are located. So in a second here, when I'm looking at, this is my admin environment, which you may or may not have access to if you're not an administrator. So here you can see default time zone is UTC. So all of this that it's talking about here is really based on, well, actually I forgot. This isn't this would show all service stuff in UTC, but as a user session, my user is configured to work in Central Time. So these will actually run in Central Standard Time. And you can again control that too from the user personalization card, and there you can actually mark what time zone the user falls under. And here I've got no value between number of times between runs, or I have a 0, which essentially means that this is going to run only once each day and not multiple times. Now let's go in and let's actually create one from scratch. So I'm going to say new, and let's say there's a specific report that I'm interested in running, a trial balance of some sort. So what I can do is I'll leave this as a report. I'm not going to select Q code unit, and from a drop down I can select what report I would like to have it automate. If I know my object IDs, and if you're an expert Dynamics NAV user, I think that would have made a lot of sense. You would probably know what it is you're looking for. Otherwise, drop down into this list, and then you can filter by the ID number or the name. I will tell you that ID searches work faster because this is an indexed field. The names are non-indexed, so depending on how quick your server is and how many reports you have, your search may come up in 10 seconds, or it could take even longer. So I could say name, I could say show me everything that has the word trial in it. So in my instance, it came up fairly quickly, and I could say, all right, I'm looking for my trial balance. So I'd go ahead and call that. Parameter string, if my report accepts any parameter strings, I would do that. In this case, because we haven't introduced a category code, I'm going to leave it blank. I'll explain these in just a wee bit. I'm going to say that its earliest start date and time will be, I usually just use the date formula T, which means today, and it assumes today at midnight, which means basically when we were fast asleep last night, that's when the clock would start on it. We still haven't said what time it's going to run specifically on these days. We're just saying that if the system clock reads earlier than 1/17/2017 at midnight, then don't bother doing anything because it's really not relevant. If I don't want this to go past a certain day, if this is only something I want to keep automating through the next week, the next month, the next year, I can also set an expiration date. Here below, I'm going to come down and say, yes, we do want to follow some report request options. I click that, and it's going to bring up my window. It will give me all the options that I have, and I could say show comparison for last year, for budget, and show me actual changes, comparison changes, like what are my columns. I'll need to select at least a couple, so I'll do that. Round to pennies, skip accounts with 0 amounts. You do not want to set print to Excel. That can cause all sorts of problems with scheduled reports. If you must see something in Excel, make sure the output type is set to Excel instead of PDF. But avoid this. I have seen all sorts of issues that happen here. Date filter. I promised I'd talk about this. Now, Dynamics NAV allows me to get date filters that are dynamic or static. So if I'm doing this for this year, I could very well say 01. Some of you may be used to putting in dates of 01-/01/17, but Dynamics NAV understands this as the same values that what I had earlier. So slashes, hyphens, or dots are optional. When I just leave this, I'm going to hit dot dot, and I'll say through the end of the year, for instance, so 12/31/17. If I said this data range is probably good enough for the foreseeable future through the end of this year. There are times, though, when I want to use date formulas. And so if I do, I could always say 01/01/17 ... today. And the system will know that means January 17, 2017. If you are using a different work date, if you're using the Cronus environment like I am here, the system might have a work date in 2018 or 2016 based on whenever they have demo dates. In Dynamics NAV, you as a user may also periodically be interested in changing the work date of the system to retroactively key in a transaction. You missed putting in something yesterday, you don't want to change all the dates on the transaction as you key, because when you put in a new sales order, by default all my document dates, etc. will populate as today's calendar date. If I don't want that to happen, I can change the work date in the system, and that's done from my home screen in Dynamics NAV. I come over here and I could say in this menu, which is not pulling up because I'm looking at this job queue. Let me go ahead and leave this. I could change my set work date from here. And by doing it, the system would then know that I intend to enter transactions on this date. The date showing below here is always the work date, and you can contrast that with your calendar date in your taskbar at the bottom right. Back in here, I'm going to go to this request page. because I didn't hit OK, it didn't take some of the things that I'd done before. I'm going to go ahead and save variance changes or actual balances and do this. And if I want it to be 01/01/17 ... work date, I can do that as well. And another little tip here is if I wanted work date minus 10 days or 30 days, something as well, I can do that as well. The Dynamics NAV comprehends that as well. So if you see over here, what I did was I keyed in a formula, work date minus 10D, which is minus 10 days. If you'd like to learn more about date formulas, our Let's Talk NAV blog actually has some really good content around it. When you go to the Let's Talk NAV blog, you go to search and you say date. I believe that should pull up, or there's one called, let me try using my customers. Here we go. So this particular one, filtering effectively with wildcard and expressions. This article will talk about date filters and ranges and so on and so forth. And there's quite a bit of more information in this as well. And you might see other related articles in here in our blog too that you're interested in. But we cover a lot of information about date formulas and how that can be helpful for you. So I'm going to go ahead and set this. I'll actually mark this as today. The reason I want to do that is when it runs tomorrow. I want it to be 1/1/17 to 1/18/17 and so on and so forth. So we hit OK here. I'm going to mark this to run on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. I can say go ahead and run this at 12:10 every day, 12:10 p.m. And I'll mark this to set status to ready. And when I do that, the status changes to ready. At this point, at 12:10, all things being equal, it should run automatically, and it should show up in my report inbox. Now, what happens is when I have things running, if something does not work, depending on the outcome and how this report is configured, I may see something under my notifications. I might also see something in the error log, which I'll talk about later today. So that's a quick overview of the report inbox functionality. Now, as I said before, this works equally well in Dynamics NAV's web client as well as Dynamics NAV's Windows client. So here I am, for instance, on my web browser version of Dynamics NAV. Same type of report inbox functionality exists, and if I was looking to just view a report, say show, it gives me my save option. For instance, in here I can pull up my report. The last time I hadn't opened it, here I can just open it and I can view my report here. And when I close it, you'll notice it's no longer in bold. I notice there's some questions. We will come back to your questions towards the end of the session. We have about another 24 minutes. I think I'll wrap up content in about 20 and then take your questions for about the last 4 or 5 minutes. Going back to the PowerPoint slide deck. Oh, we don't want to go to questions. Sorry, there's still more content. What I have next on my agenda is a little bit around what are my job queue entries and so on and so forth. So let me just go back to that slide. Because a lot of what I will do beyond the report inbox is show and tell, and it's very demo oriented, I don't have specific slides for them. What I'll be talking about next is job queues, job queue categories, and entries. So let's go there. We'll jump right back into Dynamics NAV. Here, when you want to get to a certain screen in Dynamics NAV, you can always just do the search if you don't know specifically where to find it, and you can type in job queue. One thing I've found with users is that they will usually search and then click this gray link, not knowing that the gray link will take me to related items to whatever I've searched for, but clicking this will take me to the exact entry. Also, I'm not sure how legible or clear these icons are, but depending on what it is that you type, Dynamics NAV will show you a lot of different icons on the left, and the icon will usually tell you what it is you're about to pull. These icons are indicative of reports. These gears usually tell us that it's a setup. These types of things, the grid will tell us it's a list. These are tasks or setups, etc. So just by kind of looking at that, and the little clock is archived or historical information. So by just observing this icon, I can very quickly say what it is I'm about to pull. Also, you might see certain things listed multiple times. These things may all point to the exact same item, but the reason they're being showed multiple times is they fall under different departments and they occur in a lot of different areas in Dynamics NAV's menus. So you can get to the jobs from departments jobs or from departments purchasing and planning, because you could have jobs related, purchases related to jobs, etc. Let's get back to job queue. All right, so I will actually click on the first link because I want you to see everything related to job queues. So in the job queue area, the first thing that I want you to focus on is my job queue category list. So what we do is we create some categories. The categories by themselves don't have any meaning until they're applied to a job queue entry. So think about it this way. We can create some categories here for sales posting, for purchase posting, etc. And then when we were running those report inbox reports, like I was over here, and I'm going to go back to my report here and edit this trial balance that we were looking. Yeah, we won't edit this. We just want to view this more so than edit it. When I was looking at this, I could have piggybacked this off of a job queue category code. Now, by doing that, if I have multiple automation instances running, maybe I've got one in my session, maybe one on a server, one on another server, I could actually decide where what automation service it's going to piggyback off of. So by putting it in there, there may be different rules, there may be a lot of other things going on, the system would know exactly what it belongs to. You can also have blank category code, which essentially is part of a larger global set of things that you're automating. Let's close this window. And by the way, if you haven't noticed this before because of this taskbar, even though I'd gotten to this list by clicking on the report inbox show queue, what it does pull up is my job queue entries, which is where we're going to go next. So under the job queue menu, you're going to have job queue entries. These are all the different job queue entries that we've got running at any given point in time. Some are mine, some are others. You'll see there's one for a tie. You'll also see that there's an error that happened. We'll talk about how to look at the error detail, but right away I can see if there's something that's not looking good. These are all the ones that I've shown you before that are ready. I can see the earliest date and time. I can see if it started in a user session and everything else that's going on with it. So I don't need to go in a lot of detail into this. I do want to, on the other hand, go to job queue, type it in again. Actually, just lost my train of thought for a quick second. Yeah, I want to go to my job log entries. So here is where I would be able to see all the different types of entries that are available, the successes, the failures, and everything that's happened so far. So when you want to see what's been going on in the automation, how do you error track? How do you see whether something's been successful? Did it fail? What happened? So here I can come to a particular instance and I could say, or let's see if there's an error that we can get to. And as you know, in Dynamics NAV, I can usually filter. So here are a couple of errors. Vendor trial balance on a certain date had erroneously terminated, or terminated with an error, and I can see that it didn't like the filter that we had set, excuse me. So the original filter it set was blank date to 1/25/18. It didn't care for that. It needed a starting date and an ending date of the range. If you want to see this in greater detail, you can also say show error message, and it'll show me the error message up on my screen. You can also prune all of the errors that are showing up by going to delete entries older than 7 days, for instance, and you can kind of clean up everything that's going on over here. Now, going back on the other screen that I was on before, on my entries list, what you'll find is I have similar capabilities. When I look at anything over here, whether it's success or a failure, I can look entry by entry, click here and say log entries, and it'll tell me what happened the last time it ran. Oh, look, it ran successfully. This is the one that we previously scheduled. We'll go and take a look at that in a moment as well. So you can see that that's happened there. If I want to show the record, I would be able to see more detailed information. There is no record associated with this. It's more of a report, so it will actually just kind of let us proceed. And if there was an error, it would show me the error when I say show error. So here, for instance, we're doing some email logging, and it tells me you have not fully configured it, so the folder that it requires does not exist. So all this type of information is very easy for us to track and manage. Now, what I do want to talk about a little is how do things get, how do we decide whether something is running in my session or if it's running in a at the server level, etc. So you usually do that by give me one quick second. In my particular role, for some reason, I'm not able to get to that menu item. I'm going to pause my screen here, and I'm just going to find that. Sometimes in certain roles, if you haven't noticed this already, Dynamics NAV will let you see things in certain role centers and not in others. So I want to make sure that I can get to it, and then I'll continue sharing my screen again. So Control as you say, ink and profile. In the meantime, there was a question called, is there a way to schedule the reports to appear in a different user's inbox? So that's a very interesting question. When you're working with the Dynamics NAV job queue, if you create a new item, you'll usually find the user that it's associated with. I've never tried to change the actual user value. It's called user ID. We can test that, and if it does allow you to change the user ID, that's usually a good indication that it will let you set something up as another user. And once it's set up as another user, it would show up in your inbox. By default, the intended functionality is that you're going to see things for yourself, that you're creating it for yourself and not so much for others. Okay, this is rather absurd. I'm going to have to take a quick second here. My apologies, it's one of those demo blues. Everything always works fine, and you've done it a million times until you're showing it in a demo, and all of a sudden something just does not show up as expected. So
And again, while we're waiting for AJ here, if you've got other questions you would like asked, type those into the question area on the right-hand side and we'll get those addressed.
all right, what I'm going to do is, in the interest of time, this is one of those things where, you know, for some reason it's just not popping up right now, and I'm not quite sure what's going on. I'm going to continuing to show my screen, and I'll see if I can come back to this later or maybe take a screenshot after the fact. In Dynamics NAV, there is a menu that for some reason just isn't popping up at this moment, and that allows me to control all of my job queues. So when I'm actually setting up my job queue, I could define beyond these my entries, my log entries, and my category list, I have what are called job queues, and those job queues will usually be tied to a job category list, and that is where I also define whether it's something is running within a specific user's session or if it's going to be run at a server level. And that is a very quick and easy way for us to just kind of manage and control how tasks are going to be run. What we then do is take that category code and assign them to the report inbox reports that we had set up before, or to any kind of automation that's going on, and the system would know this is going to run at the server level or this is going to run at the user level. What I'm also getting into next is, if we are running something at the server level, how does Dynamics NAV allow us to do that? This particular part requires that you have access to the Dynamics NAV server. So if you're on the Dynamics NAV server and you pull up the MMC console, this is also going to be called, when you're looking at the menu level, it'll be called the Dynamics NAV 2017, 2016, or 2015, whatever version you're on. It'll be called administration. So this is what you click on. This opens up the console we were looking at. Let's go ahead and just go to the desktop since I have it running. And in the left menu, I would want to go ahead and expand this tree and then pull the instance that I have. Some of this may not be relatable information if you are not an admin in Dynamics NAV or have never set any of this up. But what you would normally do is come down here. This area with the breakdown will also be a little bit different from version to version, but you would come down here until you see NAS Services. You would edit this. You would go ahead and say Run NAS Services with admin rights. And if there are any arguments, we will skip the arguments portion because I'm assuming none of the people attending here today are real developers. But if you did, then you would have some arguments that you could define. If there was a specific code unit that you also wanted to run, you could define when NAS was running. Some people have a certain automation thing that runs at all times, so you could define a specific code unit and startup methods. But if you are an administrator, and this is something that I would take offline because I think this is less interesting to the public at large, this is where we would manage it. We could create a NAS service. We would then define some details around this. When this is running with this service tier, which needs to be restarted anytime we make changes here, when this is running at this point, this becomes something that can be used by multiple users. The automations that you piggyback off of this NAS service will continue to run even when your session is terminated. So you're logged into Dynamics NAV 9 to 5 every day, but you might want a large report to run at 10:30 p.m. at night. If you were to set that to run in your instance or in your user session, it won't run once your NAV is terminated and your machine is shut down. So in reality, tomorrow when you come back in, you're going to have to turn your computer back on and then manually run it, and so on. It will cause all sorts of grief. But by running it at the server level, those types of things these things will run in your absence. Now, a little tip and trick, if you will, that you want to consider is if you are running a lot of intensive reports on Dynamics NAV. Intensive reports can be anything that values, revalues, adjusts your inventory costs, anything that basically takes your cost from WIP to actuals. If you do a lot of manufacturing, could be large financial reports, consolidations, etc. If you're doing any of those types of things, what you might want to consider is creating an entirely separate NAV service. So these are two NAV services here, for instance, that I have that both point to my database. Just a little 101 type of thing about Dynamics NAV is that all business calculation computations happen at this NAV server level. So what we typically do to load balance is if we want to have certain things happen that are intensive, we create an entirely separate service, or in some cases put it on an entirely separate machine and to run the NAV services from there. So allows us to have user sessions going on one server and then very resource intensive reports run on another server and service, and that way that performance impact does not affect user session and experience. But this is kind of just a little precursor to some detail that we'd be happy to cover if you are interested in or want to learn. In NAV 2009 and older, you will find references to a word called NAS, but it really works and operates differently. Even though at the core it is meant to be somewhat similar, but there's not a user-friendly console from where I can control a lot of this detail. So if you are using an older version of NAV, or if you have at some point or know somebody that is and is interested in this, that's probably going to be valuable information for you. What I want to do next is just go a little bit into how we are going to take care of any code unit, sorry, not so much code units, any reports that you want to print out, any report emailing that you want to do, etc. So I'll cover that once more. I mentioned that. I know a few more people have joined since, so I do want to address it once again. So let me know when you can see, well, you cannot talk, so I'm going to assume that you can see my screen.
Yes.
I've fired up Dynamics NAV again. Yeah, no, I just shut down NAV and then fired it up again, wanted to make sure that everybody could see it.
Yep.
All right, so because we look at Dynamics NAV's queue here and do not see email, edit this list. Because we do not see email, what type of functionality can you expect if InterDyn BMI were to add emailing capability here? If you're using NAV 2016 or 2017, you could expect functionality that resembles this. On the customer card, we now have some capability added by Microsoft So this is a NAV 2017 customer card. The layout will look a little bit different. I have some other optional components like maps and customer picture as well, which you may or may not have. We have something called a document sending profile that's been added in Dynamics NAV. So it should be in one of these areas, in the address and contact typically, or oh, right here. Just could not see it. So document sending profile. So here you can create and manage profiles, and within a profile, if I edit this, you'll see I have things like send to printer, send by email, prompt for details, or send as a PDF attachment, etc. So if you'd like to, and if you don't actually have any user interaction in the way you set up your document profile, if you don't actually need to review outgoing emails, we can use whatever your defaults are here. If you are using 2015 or older versions, then what we would probably end up doing for you is just taking one of the email addresses on the contact card and just using that. You already know that you have things like, let's go to a sales invoice or a posted sales invoice. We have long had the send as email functionality or send functionality that's existed in NAV, and when you click this in different versions it works differently. 2016 and 2017 you'll see a little globe icon in here which looks at the document sending profile and then decides how to send it. In older versions you might just have a send button, and when you click it, or send as email button, when you click it, it will automatically dispatch that as an email. But the goal is that if it is important for you to email your documents, we are able to help you with it, and we're able to help you get past that hurdle. The time is now 12:25 Central Time. I want to make sure that I leave a little bit of time for your questions, so I am going to bring up my Q&A screen with my email address. If you have any questions, this is your window. I'm happy to stay longer than 12:30 if you like. Kim, do we have any questions that our friends would like to ask?
All right, I think this one you might have done, but is there a way to schedule the reports to appear in a different user's report inbox?
Yeah, I think Scott had asked that question. I briefly talked about it, Scott. Let me research that offline. I haven't had a chance to ever try to put that with a different user ID. Normally, when I create something, it just uses my user identification, and it uses that for running within that session. It may be a hidden field. Maybe it just doesn't generally prompt me. It might be possible for me to override it. As long as a user ID is correctly chosen for a user, that it should run in that person's session. So let me experiment that, and I'll reach back out to you.
Very cool. All right. All right, here's one. I'm using NAV 5. What type of automation options are available for our version?
Well, in NAV 5, you definitely don't have the report inbox, that's for sure. And the job queue type of screens that I've shown here, the job queue categories, those do not exist in that same way. Everything is really managed at the back end. When you're installing NAV, you will need your partner to also install NASS, and then they would basically run a specific code unit, and through that code unit they'll be able to call things to automate. So it is possible, yes, it is somewhat similar, but maybe let me put it this way, it's almost the equivalent of going from DOS to Windows. We have a better user interface that allows you to manage most of these for NAV 2013 and newer in the job queue. And 5 and older, there was the NASS functionality for automation that worked, but it wasn't always as user-friendly to manage. I also recall back at that time there was a bit of a complaint coming from customers a lot around error logs not always working as efficiently. If something does fail, you might not realize until you go to the event log. Not as user-friendly here as I see on my home screen right away. So, yep, if you reach out to us, I'll be happy to kind of explain it or answer any very specific questions that you might have about your environment.
Okay. Last one in the queue is there a limit to how many reports we can set up to run automatically?
No, NAV actually does not limit you at all, but as a best practice, you do want to consider load balancing if you have a lot of reports. You do want to kind of, I think, go down the route of creating multiple NAV services like I was talking about earlier when I showed the administration tool. You might also want to consider having different NAV servers, physical machines or virtual machines. Since NAV does all of its business processing at that NAV service tier level, it would be important to have different machines or different service tiers managing different types of reports. That way, one server will not get bogged down by running 100 automated tasks or 200 automated tasks. The average customer tends to have about 5 to 10 automated tasks. I think about half of those are user reports. Maybe a couple of those tasks are routine automation requests that happen, maybe calculation of something or updating inventory and so on. But yep, there is no finite limit, hard and fast limit created by Microsoft.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you, AJ, as always. Great coverage in learning, and again, keeping up to date. You can see these added benefits, so that was very, very good.